Hello guys, nice to see you today at our new lesson. Today we will review different types of CSS selectors and we'll have a practice with writing these selectors together. Here is our agenda for today. We will cover the following questions. We will discuss what CSS selector is, observe why we should use CSS selectors, find out how to install Chro Path plugin, review common CSS patterns, apply CSS selectors in practice. Let's start from discussing of what CSS selector is. A CSS selector is the first part of a CSS rule. It is a pattern of elements and other terms that tell the browser which HTML element should be selected to have the CSS property values inside the rule applied to them. The element or elements which are selected by the selector are referred to as the subject of the selector. There are a few major advantages of using CSS selectors in comparison with other types of selectors present in Selenium such as ID, name, partial link name, etc. The first advantage of this selector is its simplicity. If you are good in writing CSS selector, it will look like a combination of one or two words. So, it will be so easy for you or your colleague to check the validity of your selector in the web page HTML with the help of DevTools, for example, in Chrome. The following advantage of CSS is that front-end developers can understand your code more. All the modern web applications use CSS as common styles for different web elements representation, such as color, size, position, etc. So, they use the same syntax that you use in your automated code. And if there is a need from developers team to support automated tests, they will not get lost in your written code. The final advantage of CSS selector is their scalability. You should not change the type of your selector even if the web element has completely changed its representation or some attribute value inside. You can just update the value of some attribute or change one attribute with another with the assistance of this powerful tool, and your automated tests will still be green and produce constant feedback regarding the application quality. I would recommend you to install Chro Path extension for your Google Chrome browser to proceed with our course, since this plugin is super convenient to validate and improve your web element selectors. Chro Path helps to generate and validate selectors like relative XPath with iframe SVG support. To install this tool to your browser, you should find it in Google first. To do so, I switch to my browser and input the following search string: Chro Path. Click on first link and select install option. Then I accept this extension installation clicking on add extension button in the appeared browser alert. Wait until the plugin is completely installed and restart my Chrome as it is recommended by this tool to help it working properly. Then open Google search homepage, right click somewhere on the page and select inspect option. See that DevTools of my browser is opened. After this, I click right here and select Chro Path option in the open dropdown. Now we can use this plugin to test our super cool selectors and optimize them to the most verbose way as it possible. I can highlight 5 simple CSS patterns. They are the following. The first one is ID. The syntax of element with specific ID in CSS is very simple. You should represent the selector as a string, which looks like the following: sharp sign and value of the element's ID. Let's switch to our browser and open Amazon homepage. To do so, I input the following text into Google, Amazon. Then I click on the first link and see that Amazon.com website is opened. Now I can right-click on the search input of Amazon and select Inspect option. I see that in DevTools this input has attribute ID with value 2-tab search text box. This means that I can open my Chro Path plugin menu in DevTools and input the following selector: sharp sign and 2-tab search text box. Then I hit on Enter key and see that only one web element is found at our web page. If I switch to my browser, I see that this search input is highlighted with green borders. That means that the specified selector returned the search input we wanted to see. The following selector type is element type. The syntax of element with specific type is super simple in CSS. You should just write the name of element type you want to find, such as input, checkbox, h1, p, etc. Let's switch to our DevTools of Amazon.com and see how the element type selector will look like for the header of this web application. I can definitely say that header will have unique element type with name header, but let's double check and see how it is called in our DevTools. So I scroll my HTML right to the element with header type and see that it matches with the header of our web application. Then I open my Chro Path plugin and input header as the selector value. After that I hit on Enter key and see that only one element that we see in our HTML is found with the help of this selector. So element type is a super simple CSS selector that can be expressed in one single short word. The following selector type is direct child. We should use this type of CSS selector when we cannot find the element exactly by its ID or type, such as in examples above. But we can locate the parent element with some specific attribute or type. The selector looks like parent CSS, whitespace, greater than special character, whitespace, direct child CSS. Let's switch to DevTools open during our previous experiments and find the direct child of header. We see that the direct child of header element has div type. If we search for div elements in our Chro Path plugin, we will see that a plethora of elements with such a type are located on our page. To locate the specific item, we can use direct child selector. It will look like the following: header greater than sign div. Let's hit Enter key and see that only one element is found with this selector. So direct child CSS selector should be used if we know the unique selector for direct parent of an element, but cannot find a unique one for the element we want to locate. Child or subchild. It is very similar to direct child CSS and looks like parent CSS, whitespace, child CSS. They are split only by space. For example, if we want to find all div elements that are descendants of header component, we should just write something like this: header, whitespace, div, and press on Enter key in our Chro Path plugin. We can see that more than 100 elements are found when we remove greater sign from our selector, but all of them are children or subchildren of header element. That is why it is very important to use the correct syntax in our CSS selectors. Let's sum up that we use child or subchild CSS selector if we should locate an element or a collection of elements with not unique selectors and we know the specific selector of their ancestor. Class selector also belongs to the family of simple CSS selectors and helps us to locate the element when we know their class name. It looks like dot and any part of class attribute that starts and ends with whitespace. For example, if we want to locate our header with the help of class CSS selector, we should go to DevTools and try to find some unique part of this class attribute value that ends by whitespace. Let's try to copy and paste the first word in the class attribute value of header, which is nav-up-sprite, to our Chro Path plugin and put $sign at the beginning of this selector. When I press on Enter key, I see that only one element with this selector is found, and it is our header component. If I copy the following word from the class attribute of header, which is nav-flex, paste it to our Chro Path plugin, and press on Enter key, I see that already two elements are found, which means that this selector is not unique for header component, so that it cannot be used to locate it on the page. Also, I can point out three following complex CSS selector patterns. The first one is next sibling. This is useful for navigating lists of elements such as forms or UL items. The next sibling will tell Selenium to find the next adjacent element on the page that is inside the same parent. Its pattern looks like main element CSS whitespace, plus sign, whitespace, next sibling CSS. To consider this example, let's switch to our web application. If you right-click inside the search input and select Inspect option, we will see that in our DevTools that the parent item with selector .nav-search-field has the adjacent element with .nav-iss-touch selector. Let's assume that I want to access this element with the help of my search input parent item. So next sibling selector will help me to do so. I should just write the following to my Chro Path plugins, such as .nav-search-field plus div, and hit on Enter key. I can see that the only one element is returned, the following sibling of my search input parent, with .nav-iss-attach plus CSS selector. So if we want to access the following sibling for some web element, we can apply this CSS selector. The following type of CSS selector is attribute values. It is useful when we want to find some element by its specific attribute value. It looks like open square bracket, attribute name, equal sign, single quote, attribute value, single quote, closing square bracket. For example, let's imagine that we want to locate our search input with the help of its name attribute value. If I switch to my DevTools and find search input element in HTML, I see that its value is field-keywords. According to CSS selector, it will look like open square bracket, name, equals, single quote, field-keywords, single quote, closing square bracket. Hence, we can use this CSS selector when we want to access the element by its specific attribute value. The final family of complex CSS selectors is substring match selectors. It is useful when we want to shorten our long selector as much as it possible and can do so by taking a part value of some attribute of web element. There are a few subtypes of this selector. The first one is starts with prefix. It will select an element with attribute which value starts with specific string. Its syntax is the following: open square bracket, attribute name, caret sign, equal sign, single quote, attribute value, single quote, and closing square bracket. If we want to locate our input element which starts with prefix selector, we can change it to the following: open square bracket, name, caret, equal sign, single quote, field, single quote, closing square bracket. Let's hit on Enter key and see that the only one element is found. The following substring match selector type is contain string. That will select an element with attribute which value contains specified string. Its syntax is the following: open square bracket, attribute name, asterisk sign, equal sign, single quote, attribute value, single quote, closing square bracket. If we want to locate our search input with contain string selector, we can change it to the following: open square bracket, name, asterisk, equal sign, single quote, dash p, single quote, closing square bracket. Let's hit on Enter key and see that only one element is found. The final substring match selector ends with postfix. That will select an element with attribute which value ends with the specified string. Its syntax is the following: open square bracket, attribute name, $, equal sign, single quote, attribute value, single quote, closing square bracket. If we want to locate the search input which starts with prefix selector, we can change it to the following: open square bracket, name, $, equals, single quote, dash keywords, single quote, closing square bracket. Let's hit on Enter key and see that the only one element is found. There are a lot of modifications and combination of CSS selectors apart from we learned today, and I still advise you to use as much simple CSS selectors as it possible to improve their verbosity and increase your test resistance to external changes. Let's sum up what we did today. We learned the following. Discuss what CSS selector is. Observe why CSS selectors are needed. Found out how to install Chro Path plugin. Reviewed common CSS patterns. Applied CSS selectors in practice. That is everything what I got for you for today. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next lesson.